Hey, you guys, I'm Ellen, and I am so honored today to be joined by Mark Krasinski and Dr. Jonathan Menachem. Mark's beautiful wife, Coleen, was born with congenital heart disease, and we are honored to hear his story about what it's like to be married to a person who is an absolute warrior and hearing her journey all through the challenges that have come with CHD and hearing about her battle. But we're also very interested to talk to Dr. Menachem, who was her transplant cardiologist here at Vanderbilt, and hear how their journey came together and the triumphs that they had and the ways that they see things can get better and how we really want to keep pushing until they do. So welcome, you guys, and thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks, Ellen.
Thank you, Ellen. Appreciate it.
All right.
So Coleen had been obviously from birth with CHD defect in her heart, and over the years was monitored and tracked throughout her history from child to adult congenital and adult congenital cardiology. And ultimately, at one point in her life, we got her admitted into transplant at a hospital local to us, and we're based outside of Philadelphia. And as the years had gone by and her basically health slowly started to progress in terms of negative health issues and having more problems, we ultimately looked and explored the idea of transplant as the next option in her life to extend her life and to improve her overall condition. As a result of that, she unfortunately was denied at the facility we were currently at for transplant due to their concerns around the outcome of her surgical procedure. So basically, Coleen and I had started an exploration and started exploring throughout the United States what facilities were out there, what physicians and what other medical facilities have been doing the latest state-of-the-art stuff to find out where we could do it next. And her doctors at both facilities up here in Pennsylvania were gracious enough to help and assist us, but unfortunately it wound up being a lot of legwork was on our own. So as part of that exploration process, we wound up researching about Vanderbilt, basically through a presentation and video that Dr. Menachem had done historically on CHD patients. We had basically gathered some more information and done some research and talked to some local physicians and found out that Vanderbilt Health was, kind of on the forefront, cutting edge of some of the latest transplants and areas to help CHD patients. And with that, we basically reached out to Vanderbilt with the assistance of one of our congenital physicians locally. We were able to get basically a transplant review at Vanderbilt. So we traveled from Philadelphia area down to Vanderbilt and spent the week in Tennessee. Part of that, unfortunately, went into the emergency room, but got ourselves a good visit to meet everybody. And that's how we initially met the team.
And so what heart defect did Coleen, what CHD was Coleen born with?
So she ultimately had single ventricle with transposition of the great vessels.
Gotcha. Do you know exactly how many open heart surgeries she endured?
Yeah, she had basically 2 surgeries as a child. One of them was as an infant, and then one of them was several years shortly after, still as a toddler. And basically she had a Glenn shunt and a pulmonary band.
Gotcha. Probably countless heart catheterizations, huh?
Yes, she had her share of heart catheterizations.
Yes. Is CHD something that shortly after you guys met, you both started talking about? How long after you met her did you find out that she had congenital heart disease?
Yeah, we actually, I knew very shortly after we had met, when we very first met, started dating. It was something that we had talked about in the beginning. It's a pretty interesting thing with CHD patients, especially those that were born earlier, around the 70s or so, when at those point in time, some of the paths and some of the techniques that doctors use obviously weren't advanced as today. And one of the methodologies they tried to use to help parents deal with it is they actually asked that CHD patients and their families treat them as normal. And as part of that, she spent a lot of her life as a young adult basically assuming she was a normal child and had a normal condition. And a lot of that basically meant she didn't actually explore and get really in depth to understand her condition as she grew to an adult. So one of the first things that her and I did when we were married as a couple, we started exploring how can she and I, both of us, further understand her condition. And part of that was is we moved her from a basically pediatric care for her CHD, and we moved her to the University of Pennsylvania, where she went to an adult congenital. And that's where both her and I started to learn a lot more about her condition. The pediatric side was more of maintaining and monitoring her health, as opposed to getting to the detailed understanding of her health and what options and things she can expect throughout her life. And the adult side really got into what can you expect as an adult patient, and what can you do with your life, and how can you further understand it. So really, I would say it wasn't until her early adulthood that we really started exploring and understanding those aspects of her condition.
It's important to recognize that when Coleen was born, right, this is around the time that they're developing these new techniques, and no one had any idea how well these kids were going to do and how long they would survive. So from a pediatric perspective, at that point, to get even these patients to adulthood was phenomenal. And it was a really big deal. And no one had really thought about, okay, so now what happens when they're adults and they go to college and they have families and they get married? And so that's how this new era of adult congenital has sort of grown, is that now, because the pediatric teams have been so phenomenal, both surgically and from a medical standpoint, that now we have this whole onslaught of adults with congenital heart disease that need a lot of high intensity care and advanced care like transplant and mechanical pumps.
And how many accredited systems, which I know Vanderbilt just achieved?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I don't know the actual number. It's on the ACHA website. I think it's a little over 60. Adult congenital heart disease is actually one of the fastest growing segments of cardiology right now. And there's more patients than there are providers that specialize in this sort of care. And so, we're trying to improve the number of centers that there are, and this is growing, and there's more and more providers that are taking care of them. But a lot of this has relied on patients and families like Mark, who figure out, okay, where do I need to get care? Not everybody is as persistent as Mark is, and he can tell you a little bit more probably about how they wound up here in terms of specifics, but it's a complicated process, and he sort of made it seem a little bit more simple, but it's a lot of figuring out where to go and who to talk to and how to get here. And in this case, the team that was taking care of Coleen in Philly, I knew them really well because that's where I had done my training, and that sort of helped bridge the gap and make those connections. But the adult congenital heart community and the transplant community, it's a pretty small community where we all are trying to pitch in and figure out ways of getting patients to the right place and getting them the treatments that they need. But Mark is underselling how much work they did on their part to make this happen for Coleen.
I would say overall, just from a standpoint of what Jonathan mentioned, I would say we probably spent at least 15 years of actually advocating and fighting to understand her condition, understanding facilities, doing research, and probably at the point where we went to Vanderbilt, I would say we probably did almost a year's worth of extensive research, of which basically a lot of that is on our own. One thing we found out is when it comes down to moving from one facility to another facility, you're basically on your own. Most facilities do not go and call around and do that work for you. It's basically up to you to go figure that out. They don't provide a list of contacts. They don't provide assistance in getting a hold of people. It's basically on you to go figure out how to do it. So basically everything we did, we had to do on our own.
I'm thinking of, from technology standpoint, I have many shortcomings, but I'm wishing there was a database where everybody could have access of, this is what they're doing here. Here's the name of the people you need. This is what they're doing. I mean, at every place, that would be.
Trying. Yeah, no, I mean, that would be a thing. I mean, right now, what's been done is is that within the community of transplant and adult congenital is, a lot of us know each other, and we're probably all within two people of knowing each other. And so we use that to try to get patients connected to the right facilities. But it is a challenge to get people to the right places. And there's delays, and that's a big thing. In that, when you're moving a patient from one place to another, especially with congenital patients, as they're progressing and developing heart failure, the things can happen really fast. And so time is not on your side. And so we really got to, do a better job of getting these patients to the evaluation process earlier. I don't know what you think about that, Mark.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we understood doing all the research we did is we understood that when Coleen's condition was going to deteriorate, we understood that it would be something that we need to be prepared for. It's not something, like you said, that once it started, we wouldn't have the next 5 years to figure out what to do. And that was due to the fact that we had done a lot of research and talked to a lot of people and tried to understand. We understood that, and even with knowing that, we thought we were fully prepared for that by having her already admitted on the transplant list at a facility, approved for surgery, and come to find out, even at that time when we thought we were ready, we were not, right? We still were unable to get her successfully transplanted at that facility just due to the amount of effort and work that's needed involved to get that done. So it's a very difficult thing. It's definitely not as easy as people think. And going from one facility to the next is even more difficult. Most people don't understand that the work that is required to get reviewed at another facility, they want to understand all of her history. They want all her medical imaging. They want all her films. They want histories of all her reports. Coleen probably had been in and out of the hospital several hundred times. For us to get records at all the facilities she had been at, for us to get medical imaging sent up to them, of which you're looking at disparate software systems across facilities that won't electronically transfer information. You're basically forced to get copies, go up, wait for them, get them on disk, take them to your house, store them. We had kept records of everything she had done, made photocopies so that we could do it. And even with that, it's constant follow-up. It's constantly continuing. There was actually one point in Colleen's case where post-transplant, within her first week of transplant, we actually got a phone call while we were sitting in Vanderbilt with her new heart. We got a phone call from one of the other facilities, and they said, "Oh, hey, you contacted us and wanted to get reviewed for transplant. We're ready to kind of talk to you about that." This is, a year later after we started contacting them, they call us, and it's while she's in the hospital. I said, she's got a new heart already. I said, so you could cancel that appointment.
Wow.
But it just shows how much work and effort is needed to try and get yourself to a point.
Oh, I can't even imagine going from facility to facility. And like Brett, in her 7 months, her chart was unbelievable. And that was only in, this one place. So I cannot even imagine having them from different places in the span of, Mark, how old was Coleen?
Coleen was 43 years old. And her birthday was 3 days after she had passed away.
Wow.
Actually, her 44th birthday was the day she was supposed to be released from the hospital.
Gosh.
When Mark, just going back just a little bit, so when Mark talks to you about, getting records and stuff, that's only part of the story in that, you can't always tell just based on the records what kind of candidate someone's going to be. And because the truth of the matter is, if you look at these records for these congenital patients, they are highly complicated and the risk is really high. So the tendency is to say no just based on that. And one of the things that we've done here is we really try to get people to come in, and because you can tell a lot from the door. And so, but granted, it's really hard. I mean, when Coleen came to see us, it was in the middle of COVID. So, but she was tough. So she was coming no matter what. So when she came, she was supposed to see me in clinic, And the night before, she wound up in the emergency room because she was having all of these arrhythmias. And in congenital patients, but specifically in the single ventricles like she was, arrhythmias are are oftentimes the white flag that goes up that says, hey, we got to do something and we got to do it quick. So we admitted her to the hospital, try to get her out of the arrhythmia. And I remember the first time I walked in the room to see her, first of all, she was pretty blue, but that was standard for her. And because of the way her anatomy was, not all of her blood was oxygenated. So it wasn't uncommon for her to have oxygen saturations that were low, in the high 70s and low 80s, where normal would be 100. So you noticed that, and you knew she was complicated, but she just had a spunk and was tough. You could just tell that this was a tough woman. And that gives you a lot of, confidence as you start to think about, is she a surgical candidate? And that's why we have also the surgeons see them, and they felt the same way. So we sent her, once she was stable, we wanted to list her for transplant, but they weren't living here yet, and that wasn't going to be, they came down and thought they were getting an evaluation. We said, let's do this. But they had to get stuff settled and had to go back up to Philadelphia. And I think on the way up to Philadelphia, I may be wrong, Mark, but you tell me, on that trip, I think she started having more arrhythmias and wound up in the hospital up at Penn. And they were having such a terrible and difficult time getting her arrhythmias under control. They ended up taking her for an ablation, which is, again, it's done fairly frequently. And Coleen was lucky that she had her electrophysiologist that did it is probably one of the best I know. If my parents had an arrhythmia, I would send them to him. And so they sort of got the arrhythmias under control. And then they moved down here and came down, and we decided to list her, and we had to sort of emergently admit her to the hospital because she wasn't as stable as we were hoping. So then you sort of fast forward to, we get her stable in the hospital, and then 5 minutes after we sort of stabilize her arrhythmias, she starts having more and more arrhythmias. So we decided at that point we had to upgrade her on the list, and I could be wrong, but I think within 24 hours we got a heart for her, which is pretty quick. But she was high enough on the list and sick enough that that's what needed to happen. And then, the way the surgery was done, the surgery went really well. She had multiple surgeons that were involved, both congenital surgeons and adult transplant surgeons, and she did well from a surgical standpoint, was up on the floor, and the plan was, we were planning on discharging her on a Friday, but decided to keep her through the weekend to do a biopsy on a Monday. I think that would have been day 14, Mark. I'm not sure of all the dates. And then over the weekend, she had an incredibly rare and horrific complication that was due to the ablation that had been done weeks ago. And despite everyone's best efforts, she didn't survive, which was, I think, awful would be putting it lightly. You have to hold for a second. This was one of those things where you're just, thinking like, where did we go wrong and what did we do? And I think, we know the cause, but again, this gets done all the time, and it was done by the best possible people. And this was one of those freak horrific things. And what it comes back to me is that I wish we had had her sooner. And that's the only thing I can really put my finger on, in that could we have done this before she had gotten worse, before we had needed all these ablations and hospitalizations and new, because she was doing incredibly well. And it's really it's just really unfortunate. And that's part of why we, Mark and I got to know each other pretty well. I don't know if he comforted me more or I comforted him more. I think he probably comforted me more. And we can talk about some of how those relationships build. But it was one where we had everything was planned, and it just this shouldn't have happened, and I don't know why it did.
Yeah.
And but she got her chance, and I tell you that the two funny things. One is, well, it's not. I never congratulate patients or give them high fives until I know they're discharged. And I was going to be off that weekend, so I went and talked to her on Friday. I didn't give her the official high five, but I did tell her how happy I was. But the funny thing too is that and we can show you before and after pictures, but she had always been blue, and then she got this heart, and her whole face changed and her whole body changed, and she had never been pink before. And it was funny to hear her she had asked the nurse if something was wrong because her lips were pink, and we had to explain to her that that's what blood flow does, that she'd never really had the blood going round and round like that before. But
I think that was one of her last things that you had talked to her about. I think it was that Friday before you had left for the weekend. You basically asked her, "Is everything okay?" And she said the only problem she has is, she says, "My nose is colored." And you said, "Yeah, that's called oxygen, Coleen."
Oh, that's extremely difficult to relive all of the different things as they happened, and it's still so fresh. There's still things. I mean, it's February 21st. It'll be 4 years since we lost Brett, and obviously our stories are vastly different. However, how I feel a lot of the times, thankfully, at least 90% more of the time, is I just want to say her name. I just want to say Brett's name and continue to talk about her life and legacy. And I'm sure that's why you're on here, helping us to share her incredible story, is to say Colleen's name and to tell her legacy and the things that give me comfort moving forward. And I think the thing that we share in common is we've got to do better. And the more we talk about it and the more we learn about this, the more we can for people in the future. I definitely would be lying if I said that there aren't times that I get angry that it couldn't have been better before and that Brett and Coleen could still be here. But the main thing is how common this is and why is it not talked about more? And so I am just so grateful that you're willing to share your story and her story with us, and so that we can make it better. And Dr. Menachem, for you dedicating your life to these patients, we're just all so grateful to just keep pushing forward. How can we just keep making it better? Like you said, the problem that we have now is that there are more adult patients than ever. And so we've just got to find a way to cater to the needs that they have. And so I'm just very grateful for both of you.
That's nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is why it's important what you guys are doing with the Boyer Foundation. And, the night that Coleen passed, I was in the hospital with them, and sorry. We're not supposed to do this. We're supposed to be tough about this stuff. So the night I came in, and we were there at her bedside when we said goodbye. And I'm not sure I could have felt more honored than to be allowed to be part of that. It's family time, and as physicians, we struggle a lot with this. We try not to show it so much. I get really mad inside. You try not to let it out. And the conversation though that we had was, we're not done telling this story. And I made Mark promise that we were going to tell Colleen's story. We're going to tell other stories, because this is important. These are important. These are kids that they were born this way, and they grow up and they got a disease they didn't ask for, and we got to tell these stories, and we got to do better. So Mark, told me yes. He knew I wasn't going to take no, though, as an answer. Didn't take much to it.
I think that's something that's just so remarkable about the whole congenital community. I could see that there has to be like policy of don't get too close, but we definitely had nurses and doctors that I'm so grateful that when the time came for them to know when policy should be pushed aside, that they did, and they cried with us and they hugged us and they loved my kid. And you obviously can tell how much you care for both Mark and Coleen. And I think that that's what makes you a tremendous provider. That's the type of stuff that makes people game changers, is when it's so personal to you and you have the knowledge. It's personal to me. I don't have the knowledge, but when you have both of those things, that's the thing that make people a game changer, a world changer for this incredibly large group of people that just want to see things get better for everybody in the future. So I'm grateful for the relationship that you two share, and very grateful to Coleen for bringing you all together.
And I think most people don't understand sometimes from a physician standpoint, not all people are as persistently annoying as I am when I advocated for Colleen's health throughout those 15 or so years. I could be a little bit annoying when it comes to this stuff, but I fought for her. And I think what a lot of times people don't understand is that it makes it difficult for patients when that relationship rapport is not there with their physician, right? When they go in and see a physician and the physician is very straightforward, just giving them information, trying to hold back technical because they don't want to overwhelm them, those patients typically are afraid to converse with their physician, right? Those patients want to hold back. They're a little bit scared. They're not sure what to say. And therefore they don't. So a lot of times I always told Coleen, she was the silent patient. She was a nurse who was extremely outgoing for all her patients. And then when she became the patient, she shut down and became quiet. So I would always go on her appointments and stuff with her to help her voice out the questions and stuff she had, because she'd always get home and forget them. Her famous quotes were, when she finally get home, I say, "What did the doctor say about this?" And she says, "I forgot to ask." Right? So when that rapport is there, like she had with Dr. Menachem, the ability for her to convey how she's feeling, to talk about things, to ask questions, right? It's easier for her to do that when she has that type of rapport like she did with Dr. Menachem. And that information is helpful to the physician to understand how the patient's doing, and for the patient to get their questions answered. We went to some doctors in the past that were very, very curt with us, right? They wanted to get in, they wanted to get out, they wanted to move on to the next patient. And we really got nothing answered. We didn't get our questions answered. We didn't get the information. We didn't feel satisfied, and we would basically move on. So, and now that relationship moves on with Colleen's passing with me. Without that relationship that Coleen had with Dr. Menachem, I wouldn't have the ability to be connected to you, right? Obviously at the Boyer Foundation, it just wouldn't be possible if we didn't have that relationship. So I think it's really important, and most people forget how developing this kind of relationship really helps both the patient, helps obviously the physician to understand more about them, and helps advocacy and information to get distributed out to the public.
I can certainly tell of the deep appreciation and love between all of y'all, and so I'm so grateful that y'all let me sit in on it. And I'm, like I said, just very grateful to Coleen that she connected all of us. And
no, she was a special person. She was an Eagles fan, which I'm not really, but
you keep having these patients that are Eagles fans. They're all finding you in Nashville.
Yeah. No, but I mean, I think, and Ellen, I mean, thank you for doing this sort of thing. I mean, you know what I think about you guys, and you and Bo and the Boyer Foundation. I mean, this is the sort of thing that changes the world and the way we take care of these patients. Because as you and I have talked, the problem is with medicine too, is we're a little bit stuck in our sort of old academic nerdy ways, right? So and we're working on it now, and I talked to Mark about this, we're writing up Colleen's case to present to publish in a journal, and I will give this talk and include her case in multiple talks that I'll give. And the truth of the matter is that that'll reach a limited number of people. It reaches the academic community. And but most people aren't looking through medical journals to try to figure out what to do. They're going on Google and they're going on Instagram. And, when you guys have posted videos and reached out to people and you're reaching tens of thousands of people, that's making a dramatic difference. And so, the fact that you're taking so much time with us, but to tell Coleen's story, I think is there will be multiple patients that will respond to what Mark's saying, and hopefully we'll get a different outcome.
I hope so. Well, we are honored to share your story. So Mark, thank you so much. Dr. Menachem, thank you. We pray that this just keeps rolling. As much as you want to say Colleen's name, Mark, we want to shout it right with you. I know how healing it is and how much it feels good to continue their legacy, because warriors like her just can't be, her story should not be quieted. We should shout it from the rooftops, and we are honored to do that with you and to hopefully continue, join arms and make things better for those that are coming in the future. So thank y'all both so much.
Thanks, Ellen.
Thank you, Ellen.